Hola, boa tarde. Hola, buenos dias. And hello, good afternoon. I am Melissa Hageman. Welcome to this webinar co-organized by the National Council of Rectors of Costa Rica, CONARE, and the Budapest Open Access Initiative, the BOAI. As we mentioned and just explained, we have simultaneous interpretation in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And the webinar is also being recorded, and recording in the 3 languages will be made available. We would welcome all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrea for a welcome from CONARE.
Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Let me also thank CONARE, the National Council of Rectors of Public Universities in Costa Rica, that has helped us with this initiative for this webinar, and in particular, my university, Universidad Nacional, that has helped us with resources. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Andrea. Now, as background, the BOAI offered the first definition of open access, proposed complementary strategies for realizing open access, and launched a worldwide campaign for open access to all new peer-reviewed research. This year, the initiative has transitioned into an organization that fosters the development of equitable open access and supports the adoption of policies, practices, and sustainability models that make scholarly communication free to read and publish. The idea for this series of webinars came from a conversation I had with one of our BOAI advisory board members, Sarai Cordoba, in which she noted that she had observed a worrying trend of journals in Latin America adopting or considering to adopt the APC model. Of course, Latin America pioneered the development of diamond journals, which are both free to read and free to publish in. These journals are typically supported by research departments within universities or through government funding and are leading examples of equitable open access. Today, there's global interest in the diamond model. We held our first webinar a few months ago, and given the interest in it, with over 250 participants, we decided to launch a series of webinars on this critical issue. Today's discussion, while focused on Latin America, will highlight work being done in Brazil. We have an all-star lineup of speakers as well as a fabulous moderator. Our speakers include Arianna Becerril García, who is a full-time professor at the Autonomous University of the State of Mexico and member of the National System of Researchers of Mexico. She is the executive director of Redalyc and chair of AmeliCA. And I'm very pleased to say that she is also the chair of the BOAI organization. In addition, we are joined by Andrea Vieira, who holds a PhD in education and has been a public servant at CAPES, the Brazilian Federal Agency for Support and Evaluation of Graduate Education, for 17 years and has served as the general coordinator of the CAPES Journal Portal since 2020, playing a strategic role in the management of scientific and technological information resources. She has experience in public policy development related to access to scientific information, scientific content, curation, and institutional collaboration with universities, research centers, and funding agencies. She leads innovative projects aimed at developing solutions to optimize dissemination of scientific knowledge in Brazil and its internationalization. We are also joined by Fhillipe Campos, who is a master's student in information science and has a bachelor's in librarianship from the University of Brasilia. He is an information management analyst and researcher at the Brazilian Institute of Information in Science and Technology, or IBICT, as well as a member of the General Coordination for Scientific Technical Information at the Institute, where his work focuses on infrastructure such as the Brazilian Portal for Scientific Journals, the Directory of Brazilian Electronic Scientific Journals, the directory of editorial policies of Brazilian scientific journals in the Brazilian Center of Latinx. We are also joined by my close partner and co-organizer, Andrea Mora Campos, who is a professor at the National University of Costa Rica and an academic advisor for open science at the university. She is a member of the Open Science Subcommittee of CONARE and coordinator of the Central American and Caribbean Open Science Group at the Central American University Superior Council. In addition, we have Edna Montero, the president of the Association of Brazilian Science Editors, or ABIC, Brazil. And we are joined by Peter Suber, who is the senior advisor on open access at Harvard Library and director of the Harvard Open Access Project at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. By training, he's a philosopher and lawyer and stepped down from his position as a tenured professor of philosophy in 2003 to work full-time on open access. Peter serves on the boards of many groups devoted to open access and scholarly communication and has been active in fostering open access for many years through his research, speaking, and writing. Peter is a member of the BOAI Org Steering Committee and was the principal drafter of the original BOAI in 2002, as well as our 10th and 20th anniversary recommendations. Now, the webinar will be moderated by Bianca Amora, who holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics from Pompeu Fabra University and a degree in Library Science, Law, and Literature. She is data governance coordinator at the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. Bianca is quite active with many international projects, including being a member of the Global Open Research Commons International Working Group, a member of the Lyricist Board of Trustees, a member of the Advisory Committee of SCOS, a member of the IFLA Academic and Research Library Section, co-organizer of the LUSU Brazilian Open Science Conferences, and is the winner of the International Electronic Publishing Trust for Development Award in 2015. And again, I'm Melissa Hegeman, the director of the BOAI Org. And with that, I'll hand it over to Bianca. Thank you all.
Muito obrigada, Melissa. Primeiramente, eu gostaria de agradecer à própria Melissa.
First of all, let me thank Melissa for the invite to moderate this very important webinar to discuss Diamond magazines. I believe that, as I was able to see now, we have participation from different countries in Latin America, and this is very important for us to discuss together this matter. First of all, and before giving the floor to my illustrious colleagues from this seminar, I would like to introduce to you a brief landscape of scientific journals in Brazil. I'm not going to elaborate on this because they will be doing this task to present the situation of this magazine, of these journals in Brazil. I can tell you that following the translation of all of Latin America and Brazil, Brazil is a country where diamond open access prevails. Through time, we have been creating our journals in the universities and through the research institutions. And those that are in charge of maintaining these journals are the universities themselves and also the research institutions. We have a very large series of scientific journals, and Fhillipe Freitas will talk a little bit more about this. And today we have around 4,000 scientific journals. We ask ourselves, and this is a personal question that I have, if we need so many journals, but at any rate, the idea is most of these journals don't charge APC. What they do is that they have extensive visibility and use by the researchers. Having said this, there is also a trend today that we need to concern ourselves that these journals begin to charge the APC and take away the responsibility from those that I always say, if you are a university or a research institute and you allowed to create a journal, there's a parallel with the creation of a child. If you decide to have a child, who needs to support the child? Me. Therefore, in this regard, I believe we need to work very strongly together with institutions, universities, and research institutes, and also federal bodies, so that this support comes from the parents, quote unquote, of these journals, as well as from our federal organizations that deal with scientific communication in Brazil. Now, let me give the floor to my dear panelists. If I'm not wrong, let me begin with Arianna, right? Yes, Arianna. Dear Arianna, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Bianca. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you for your introduction. It's an honor to share this panel with so many experts. Thank you so much. And thank you, BOAI Org, for organizing, together with Andrea, this webinar that has a lot of relevance, because we've seen data that are alarming regarding the adoption of APC, and it's important to reflect on this. And if you allow me, I would like to share some slides that I have presented before in a BOAI webinar, but they're slightly updated. The trend doesn't change, but it allows us to reflect on some important things. Just a second.
¿No lo ven en modo presentación, cierto?
No, Ari.
No, todavía no.
Ya, no sé qué pasa. No me permite ponerlo en modo presentación. A ver, voy nuevamente. Disculpen por...
Okay.
Ahora sí.
My
Ahora
apologies.
sí, ok, muy bien. Entonces,
So,
ahí estoy. Listo. Básicamente tengo 5 minutos.
basically, I have 5 minutes. It's a little time for me to talk about so many things, but I would like to mention 2 important aspects. It's a study we've been updating on the Redalyc database. As you know, Redalyc indexes diamond open access journals exclusively. And this allows us to realize the evolution or involution detours or distortions from the diamond model, particularly in Latin America, that you know we've been indexing journals from elsewhere in the world, but the most important varieties from Latin America. We made an exercise to review what we have, and we realized many journals had begun to charge APCs at different scales, and it got mostly accentuated during the pandemic, where there were lots of economic restrictions by universities to continue providing different resources to the journals. And we identified 7% of the journals that we had indexed at the time began to charge APCs in the last few years. So we set ourselves to identify the purpose. Evidently, 100% do it due to survival in order to take care of basic expenses. They don't do it for profit reasons. We're all very clear about this, mostly because in Redalyc we don't index commercial journals, so profit is discarded because of the legal nature of the journal. We only index academic or research institutions, not commercial purposes, and this gives us the guarantee that it's not for profit. And what we've seen is based off the adoption of APC, which is APC for journals to continue operating at a basic level. We've also seen distortions and undesired effects after the adoption of APC. So something I want to underscore is APC is not only a business or sustainability model, it's a way of operating a journal that has effects in the languages being published, as well as in the subject matters and the communities they represent. That's why in Redalyc, we've confirmed that imposing an APC, no matter how small, changes the authorities of authors and therefore can distort these communities to attend the authors that have the resources to pay, because we can say it's very small APCs, even $100 or less. But in our countries, I'm not talking about Latin America, but the global South, this represents not only a huge amount, but also there's no institutional support or the procedures to have access to such a resource. As a result of the study, I think I've already taken 5 minutes. So journals only charge for publishing, not for translation, although some do, and other processes before publication. And we see a trend, and I'm very happy to see the strong team of Brazil for us to get this feedback. Brazil leads, but it's normal that it leads because it's huge. So in the statistics, Brazil leads very easily, but in the number of journals that have adopted APC in the last few years, it leads as well, followed by Spain, Mexico, and Venezuela. The areas that began to charge APC, according to Redalyc, is agricultural sciences, which is interesting, earth sciences. Medicine, medical sciences is very strong, psychology, and this is the weight by area, and you can see the distribution of the journals that have begun to charge: health, education, and the study. And let me tell you very quickly, begins to compare what gets published before charging APCs and the topics being charged after. So in a nutshell, what we see is the topic becomes global, make it less local, because we see authors of other countries with more resources or in more global subject matters, less related to the local arena. And one of the great strengths is that it represents local science, country science. And this is an undesired effect, it seems to me, for the charge of APCs. We see Mexican journals that have begun charging APC work on corn, that we know it's one of the biggest subject matters in Latin America, as shared by many countries. And these journals that have begun to charge, we want to see the effect of what they begin to publish once they charge authors. These communities change. We can make a new cutoff to see if this keeps changing. In the case of Brazil, It's health journals, nursing that have begun charging that we identify from Redalyc in this study, and it's important to follow up their subject matters and the agendas. I put this example because it's very representative of Cuba. There are Cuban magazines, journals that have begun to charge APCs, and they've dealt with sugarcane, which is very relevant to Cuba and Caribbean countries. Once they begin charging, local researchers have begun to express their impossibility to charge in Cuban journals. So therefore, where will this be published? And the topic is if this is of interest to a journal from the north, a commercial journal, or something that is edited in a country where no sugarcane is produced, and this issue is not relevant. So diamond journals are public assets to communicate relevant science at a local level. It's one of the conclusions that we need to provide follow-up on. And let me just explain for one more minute the language effect. The languages that have begun to charge APCs can be seen here. Evidently, Portuguese prevails because it's several Brazilian journals that came up in the study. And what we see is this effect. It's an effect where what you see in yellow is English and in green Portuguese. So we see that based off the adoption of APC, and we see a drop, but starting in 2015 or 16, the effect of the publication goes up and Portuguese drops. This trend to globalize publications in subject matters and language relates somehow, or I don't know if correlates at an origin level, but there's a relationship between the adoption of APC, the increase of English, and the drop of local languages, Portuguese and Spanish. So the question that I leave to you is, what effects do we have by charging APCs? It's not good to trivialize it as a way to sustain a journal to generate profit. Of course, we understand editors because they see a way to sustain a journal with their own resources, even their time for free, and resources from where they can take them. And once again, I think the co-responsibility of institutions is very important. Governments, institutions, public agencies that can support the editorial community to sustain the journals, because it's for the own benefit of the country and the institution to communicate their local science with social relevance for research agendas of countries and institutions. If we're all co-responsible, we can support the editorial community to avoid adopting APC, because it's not only saying editors want to charge. We're not trying to satanize editors, publishers, but they react because they don't have economic possibilities. So we need to make an international call regarding being co-responsible as public assets to support the editorial community. And I'm going to stop here and open for the discussion. Thank you. You're bringing up very important points. And this is a very important study for us to think. Actually, what we need to do, the situation is aggravating, and I would like to leave another point here, which is to look for the internationalization, and we're losing that which is so dear to us, which is our linguistic identity.
É muito importante pensar em
This
preservar
is a
nossa
language
língua
of
como língua de
science.
ciência.
It's
E, sem
important to
dúvida
preserve our
nenhuma,
language
aquelas
as a
particularidades
language of
de cada
science,
área,
and
são
unquestionably
áreas,
the
muitas vezes,
specificities of
são
every one
áreas
of the areas, and many
autóctones,
of them
que somente
are
aquela região possui
autochthonous,
e que
and it's
não serão
only that region
internacionalizadas.
has,
Então, essa é uma
and it
questão que
won't be
nós temos que levar em
internationalized.
conta
And this is an aspect we need to take
em
into
todo o
account
processo. Bom, mas eu não estou aqui para
along the
discutir, estou
process.
apenas para
So
moderar.
I'm not here to discuss,
Muito
I'm
obrigada,
here to
Arianna, uma
moderate.
vez mais. E agora eu passo
Thank
a
you,
palavra para a
Arianna,
minha
once
querida Andrea
again. And
Vieira.
now let me give the
Você
floor
tá,
to Andrea Vieira.
o palco é seu.
Obrigada, Bianca.
The floor
Primeiro, eu
is
gostaria de
yours.
agradecer o
Thank you,
convite,
Bianca.
agradecer o
And
convite para
first, let
participar
me
desse
thank
evento. Como a
for
Ariana
the
falou, é
invite
uma honra.
to
É muito
participate
bom
in
poder
this
estar aqui
event. It's
refletindo,
an honor
discutindo
to
de
be
forma
here,
conjunta e que a gente possa evoluir
reflecting
realmente e sair
jointly
daqui com alguma proposta para que a gente continue trabalhando e
and come
fortalecendo o
out
diamante.
with a
Eu vou falar
proposal
pouquinho
to
aqui,
continue
né, da
working and
nossa
strengthening
experiência na CAPES. Eu
Diamond.
vou
I would
também,
like to talk about our experience in COPS.
Gente, apareceu uma mensagem para eu botar aqui rapidinho, confirmar
Here
a minha
I
língua.
have a
Pronto,
very
eu acho que é
important
para tradução.
message.
Eu vou aqui só compartilhar. Um minutinho.
Let me share my screen.
Tenho só uns slides para vocês usar. Vocês já conseguem ver?
Agora sim.
Okay,
Sim.
we can see now.
Então, eu sempre gosto de aproveitar para falar um pouquinho da
I
CAPES,
would
porque
always
muita
like to
gente
take
não sabe
advantage to
tudo que a
talk
gente
about
faz. Às
CAPS
vezes, né, não tem essa
because
dimensão.
many
Hoje, a
people
CAPES, que é
don't
uma agência
know what
federal de
we
fomento,
do. CAPS is
ela
a
fomenta
federal
tanto o Sistema
agency
Nacional de
of
Pós-Graduação,
en-
quanto avalia esse
encouraging
sistema, que hoje são
postgraduate
mais de 5
systems,
mil
as well as
programas
the assessment of
entre cursos de
systems,
mestrado e
which is
doutorado.
over
A gente
5,000
fornece
programs
mais de
between
100 mil
master's
bolsas de
and
mestrado,
PhD
doutorado e
programs,
pós-doutorado. A gente
offering
forma
all
os
over
professores de educação básica aqui no
103,000
Brasil,
master's,
tanto inicial,
PhDs,
formação
and
inicial, com
post-PhDs
bolsas, quanto
programs,
continuada. A gente
both in
tem a
initial
UAB, que é a
formation with
Universidade Aberta do Brasil,
scholarships
que tem mais de 600 polos no Brasil. A gente faz toda uma parte de
and
cooperação internacional. Então,
we have
realmente, a gente atua junto às universidades brasileiras
675
para
different
fomentar também
positions
a
in Brazil
internacionalização.
to
E nós
encourage
temos o
as
oficial de
well
periódicos,
the
que é a razão de
internationalization.
estarmos aqui
And we have the
evento
journal,
hoje. E nós
the portal
atendemos no portal
of
de
journals.
periódicos
That's why we're here.
448
And in
instituições.
this
Esse número
portal,
ele vai
we take
variando
care
ano a
of
ano, porque depende
448
de quantas das
institutions,
universidades que
and
surgem,
it
os
varies
programas que são
years
criados, aí
after
a gente
year,
inclui
and
novas
it
universidades a
depends
cada
on
ano.
the what
Mas vamos então
universities
falar
create. So
sobre
sometimes we
a
include
nossa
universities
temática de
every
hoje. Eu
year.
queria começar
Now,
falando de
let me
desafios
talk
que a
about
gente tem
today's
na
subject matter.
comunicação científica
What
como
are
um
the
todo, não
challenges
só
that
falando
we
da
have
questão do diamante, mas que a
in
gente enfrenta
scientific
aqui
communication as a whole?
diariamente,
Not only talking about
considerando
diamond that
tudo que
we
a
see
gente
on
tem
a
que fazer para
daily
atender
basis,
as diferentes
but
áreas de
considering
conhecimento.
everything we need to
Então, a
do
gente tem uma
to
questão
take
que
care
é
of the various
basilar, que é
areas of
a
knowledge.
sustentabilidade financeira.
We have
Então, assim,
something
não adianta a gente
fundamental,
falar de
which is
comunicação
financial
científica sem
sustainability.
falar de
It's
mínimo de
useless
financiamento para que isso aconteça.
to
A
talk
gente tem que
about
pensar
minimum
também na
funding for
infraestrutura
this to
editorial e
happen.
tecnológica,
We
a gente
need to think
precisa de
about
capacidade
the
técnica, de
infrastructure
capacidade
at
de
an
gestão,
editorial
porque
and
também isso
technical
aí é
level.
necessário,
We
né,
need to
para que a
have
gente possa
technical
fazer com que os registros
capacity,
se desenvolvam.
management
E a gente
capacity
precisa
to
também,
make
muito que a
journals
gente vem falando,
develop.
de
And we
reconhecimento e
also,
visibilidade, que
much
aí
of what
passa
we do
pela avaliação,
is a
né? Avaliação da
recognition and
aplicação científica.
visibility that goes
Então, agora,
through the
no
assessment of
nosso
this scientific
quadradinho aqui, na
production.
nossa realidade, considerando todos esses
In our
desafios da comunicação
reality,
científica, qual está
considering
sendo a nossa
all of the
resposta a
challenges
esses
that we
desafios? Né? A
have,
gente vem
what's our
aí, eu posso
response to
dizer,
this
desde
challenge?
2023, construindo, tentando
From
construir um
2023,
portfólio.
we're
Então, a gente
trying to
sai de uma
build a
situação, vejam
portfolio,
que o portal de
going
periódicos iniciou
from
suas
a
atividades no ano
situation
2000. E a
of
gente
a
está
journal
agora
portal
celebrando
that
25
started
anos.
out its activity
Até
in the year
2023,
2000,
a
and now
gente
we're
só pagava
celebrating
para acessar
25
conteúdos
years.
científicos.
In
E pagando
up to
valores muito
2023,
altos,
we
como vocês
would
sabem.
only pay to have
A
access
partir
to
de
scientific
2023,
content,
a gente
and it was
então
very high amounts. Starting
decide
in
ter um
2023,
olhar
we
diferente,
decided
ter olhar também
to
para os
have a
diamantes,
different
a
perspective,
gente já vinha fazendo de forma
looking
muito
at
tímida,
diamond,
e aí a gente decide convidar a comunidade
still in a
científica para
very
conversar,
technical perspective. And we
entender
decided to
por onde que nós
invite the
deveríamos seguir
scientific
para sair
community
desse
to
padrão
talk and
apenas
understand
por
where
acesso.
we should
E aí,
head
com os eventos que nós
to
fizemos aqui, workshops
only pay
colaborativos,
just
né,
for
com a participação não
access.
só ali da comunidade,
So
de
we
outros atores
had
também,
different
nós
collaborative
pegamos
workshops, not
nesse
only
desenho
from the
de
community, but the different
investir em
stakeholders.
infraestrutura
And we
aberta
arrived
por
to
meio do
this,
Cielo.
which is
Essa foi uma
investing
decisão
in
inicial,
open
porque o Cielo a
infrastructure
gente
through
conhece a
Cielo.
gestão e a
This was the
governança
initial
que é feita,
decision because we
né,
understand
pelo
governance and
programa.
management
E
being
nós
done,
decidimos também alterar a nossa
what the
política,
programs
porque o
do.
Portal
We
é uma
decided to
política
change
pública,
our
e
policies
nós
of the journal
colocamos
portal. It
dentro da
has a public
política a
policy.
possibilidade do acesso
And in
aberto,
this
a
public
possibilidade de
policy, we
pagamento,
included the
da
possibility of open
publicação também, dos
access,
temidos
the
e, né, os
possibility for
apps que a
payment
gente,
for
famoso das reviews que
publications,
eu vou falar um pouquinho mais pra frente.
and
Nós
the
também incluímos
APCs,
na
in
nossa
spite of the
política,
criticism.
e por conta
We
dessa
also
inclusão,
included
nós
our
assinamos
policies,
acordos de
and
leitura
because
e
of this
publicação.
inclusion, we signed agreements of reading and
Mas especificamente,
publication.
o que a gente está fazendo para promover o acesso que a gente chama
So,
aqui não
what are we
comercial, né? O
doing to
acesso
promote
aberto não
access, what that we call
Nós criamos
non-commercial
essa
open
portaria, então
access?
reformulamos a nossa
We
política
created
pública, podendo
this
apoiar o acesso aberto. Então, se
organization
vocês
by
veem a nossa política,
reforming
vocês
our
percebem que
public
ali
policy.
a
And
gente
if you
abre esse
see,
cielo, mas abre outros
you can
caminhos também.
read that we
Então,
opened
que aí
ourselves for
vem
Cielo
sendo
and other
trabalhado. Nós
roads.
criamos também em 2023
We're
grupo de
also
trabalho do
working,
acesso
and we
aberto
have the
com os atores
possibility
do
in
ecossistema,
2023 to create
tá,
a
de
working
ciência,
group with
tecnologia
open
e educação do
access
Brasil.
with the actors
Esse
in the
grupo de trabalho,
ecosystem
desse grupo de
and
trabalho
of
saiu
technology and
relatório com
education in Brazil,
várias
and from this
recomendações,
working
tá?
group, a
Nós
report
participamos
came
do
out with a
programa
series of
editorial junto
recommendations.
com o CNPq. O
We
CNPq já
participated
faz
on
esse
the
programa há
editorial
bastante tempo, e a
program
gente
with
vem
CNPq,
conjuntamente
and
colocando
this program
recursos.
has
Não
existed
são
for some
muitos
time,
assim, o
and
recurso não é
jointly
alto,
we're
tá?
allocating
A gente
resources. It's
repassou
not a
do
lot
Instituto
of
Digital 3
resources,
milhões de
but
reais,
still,
que
we've
valor
already gone
muito
beyond
pequeno
3
frente a
million
tudo que a gente
reals that
investe
we
em comunicação
transferred. It's a
científica.
very small
Nós estamos
amount
participando
for everything we do in
do
scientific
governo
communication,
aberto, que
all of what
inclusive a
we
Arianna
invest and
está
participate in
liderando
open
com a gente
government,
a OGP. E com a
and
OGP,
that we're
nós
also
conseguimos
leading
fazer avanços
with other
significativos junto à
OGP,
comunidade científica,
that
tá?
is
Isso em
open government
2023.
partnership,
Já em
that we
2024,
have
sai
important
o nosso
advancements
relatório
in
do grupo
the
de acesso
scientific
aberto,
community.
a gente
In
assina termo
2024, we
de
have the report
financiamento de
of
3
the
anos
working
de
group
Cielo,
on
que é
open
algo que a gente
access,
vem sempre
and we
conversando. E
signed
talvez seja essa,
an
né,
open
realmente a
funding
parte que
agreement.
leva
We've
a
been
gente
talking
destacar
about
para a minha
this for
pesquisa, a
some
falta de
time,
financiamento. Então, a
and
gente
this
conseguiu
is
fazer um contrato
what
de 3
journals
anos com
should
Cielo,
charge.
então, já
And therefore,
repassamos
we
esse
did a
recurso, então a gente já
3-year
garantiu
contract
que
with
Cielo vai ter
Cielo.
esse financiamento
We
até
transferred these
2026.
resources, and Cielo will have
Estamos
this
agora, né,
funding
também
in
colocamos a portaria do
2026.
APC, porque a gente
Now we're also
precisava
allocating an
regulamentar, só que há um
APC
ponto muito
ordinance
importante,
to
tá?
regulate,
Essa questão do
but to a
APC,
very
ele não é
important
qualquer
point.
revista
The
que
issue
pode
of
vir, o pesquisador
APC
publicou
is not
na revista A, B
just
ou C.
any
Não, a gente
journal
tem
that
feito todo o nosso trabalho
researchers
de pagamento de
published in a
APC,
journal
ele tá no
ABOC.
âmbito dos
All
contratos
of
que a
our
gente
APC
já
payment
celebrava
program
anteriormente.
is in the scope of the
Então, nós
contracts that
conversamos, nós
we
temos
held
conselho
before.
consultivo com as
Therefore,
áreas científicas, e
we
esse
have a
conselho científico,
consulting
ele nos
council with
orienta
different
sobre quais
with
contratos que a
different
gente deve, né,
scientists
ou
that
eles
guides
têm
us
interesse
on
que a
what
gente faça essa parte de
contracts
publicação.
they're
Então, até o
interested
momento,
for
nós temos
us
4
to do the
contratos assinados com a
publication
American
part.
Chemical
So
Society,
far,
com o
we have
IBICT
4
e com a
agreements,
Royal Society Publishing. Outros
and
contratos estão em negociação, né?
and
Como
other
também a gente
contracts are
vem
being
trabalhando nessa questão
negotiated.
do
And
diamante.
we're also
Então,
working on
ponto
diamond.
muito interessante que a gente
A very
ficou,
interesting
com
point that we
relação
have
ao governo aberto, né, que essa iniciativa que a gente
about
tem com o Ministério
open
da Ciência e Tecnologia,
government
que
is an
saiu
initiative
documento
that we have with the
referencial
Ministry of
agora desse
Technology,
ano, em maio,
and
para
it's
avaliação
a
do
referential
próximo
document
pedido,
came
né,
out in
dos
May
nossos cursos de mestrado e
to
doutorado, porque a gente sabe que a avaliação tem papel
approve the
fundamental
next period of master's and
no
PhD's
encaminhamento de todas as
programs,
políticas de
and
comunicação
education has a key
e
role
no
for the
documento
other
referencial
communication
ficou bem
policies.
claro
This referential document clarified the relevance of open science, and we celebrate this here because in CAPS, and we celebrate that open science begins to appear in the documents of reference. And this for us was a very significant step in everything that we're building since 2023. In this assessment process, there is a new procedure to classify articles, and this is very important. I don't know if you know, before we had a qualis that we worked on it for decades, and now we don't have a qualis. Areas see the articles. It's the factor of impact on the journal that no longer interferes, because for every course, we can see what documents are the most important and documents that also have a social impact. Therefore, we've made great progress because when we come out of impact, we have another perspective and we lose a little this commercial relationship, which is very important to impact. We also created an open committee in open science in CAPS. This is, we created a permanent committee and it's very bureaucratic. We have to go through several instances, but with this model, we're creating a permanent committee to reflect closer to the community with faster actions to see if they're appearing and prevailing in the everyday assessment of the areas, because this is another point we're discussing. All of the reflections that are relevant and important, oftentimes the researcher, the coordinator of the course doesn't get there. So our work is to build this bridge to get up to the researcher and course coordinator, the coordinator of the assessment area. It's not that they don't care about open science. There's several things that happen in the agenda of the researcher. And what do we do so that they can understand the value that is in these two words, open science? It's not simple because we have the specificity of every area. It's organic, I would say. But when we talk about data, open science, local journals, oftentimes you cause a not so good impact. And we've tried to work to demystify and strengthen everything that we do in regards to open science. Regarding the future, we know that today our budget is $100 million. We're allocating in open access practically 2% of this amount. Our idea is to grow the percentage of our investment in diamond access. And as Arianna mentioned, journals need funding. And if we don't achieve that funding, they will charge because they need to charge. It may have a different name, not necessarily APC, but they need to charge a rate to survive with quality work, with best editorial practices, because we can't forget about this. Diamond journals need this funding to guarantee, because there are many things related to investigation, plagiarism, AI. If a journal doesn't have funding, how can identify if the article has problems.
E a gente
We
vem
need to
pensando
get
aí
the
pro
funding
futuro,
for
tá?
these journals.
Na verdade,
What
nós já
we've thought for the
desenhamos
future,
programa de fortalecimento das revistas do Brasil.
we're already coming up
Nós
with a
sabemos que
program
não
to
conseguiremos
strengthen
implementar
journals in
todas, porque a
Brazil.
Bianca colocou
We
são mais de
know
4.000
we won't be able to
revistas
help
científicas,
them
então
all because
é
it's over
impossível a gente
4,000.
implementar todas,
It's
tá?
impossible
Mas a gente já tem começando esse desenho, vai
for
ter o
all,
Comitê
but
de Ciência Aberta que
we've
vai
already
nos ajudar,
started
né,
with this.
vamos dizer, no
There's an
refinamento
open
desse programa.
science committee
A
that
gente
will
também
help
vem
us
conversando aí
refine
com
this
IBICT,
program, and we're
para
also
termos pouco de
talking
cooperação técnica, porque qual
with
a ideia?
IBICT
Como
to
que a
have a
gente pode
technical
melhorar?
cooperation
Como que a gente
agreement,
pode
because
ser
how
mais
can we
abrangente? Então, a gente
improve?
está com o IBICT, que
How
tem uma
can we
expertise
be more, reach
enorme em
more?
ciência aberta, para nos
IBICT
auxiliar nesse
has
processo,
huge
nessa
expertise in
construção, na
open
pavimentação
science that
dessa
can
nova
help
via.
us in this
E também a
process,
gente, a CAPES,
in the
CAPES tem plano de
pavement of
torcer
this
por parte do
highway.
BOAI, que eu acho que também é outro ponto
We also
interessante
have the
nessa
participation
construção
of the
dos
Advisory
diamantes.
Council of
Então,
BOAI,
eu
and
queria
it's
terminar,
very
desculpa
important
se eu
the
falei
construction
demais,
of
mas eu
diamond.
queria colocar
Let
que
me
a CAPES entende
finish, and my
que
apologies if
o
I
acesso
went
aberto ao
overboard,
diamante, ele é
but
mais que um modelo, é uma escolha
Diamond
política.
Open Access
E é uma
is
escolha
more than a
política que
model.
nós
It's a political
abraçamos. Não é
choice
fácil,
that we
são muitos
embrace.
atores para
It's
que a
not
gente possa
simple.
convencer de que é
There are many
possível ter
stakeholders
um
that we need
modelo
to
diamante com
convince that it's
qualidade, com
possible to
profissionalismo,
have
mas eu
a
acho que a
diamond
gente vem
model with
trabalhando
quality
fortemente
professionalism,
nessa construção
but
e a gente conta com o apoio de
we've
todos
been working
vocês,
very
aprendendo
strongly
com
in the
boas práticas
construction, and we have
e
all
também
of
nos
your support
fortalecendo, né, que a gente
to
possa
learn
ir
from the
caminhando
best
junto
practices and to strengthen
nessa estrada
ourselves
e que a
to
gente
walk
possa, e outra coisa que eu
together
falo, né,
in
gente, a
this
gente não
journey.
faz algo de qualidade de um dia para o outro.
And
Então,
what I
a
say,
gente precisa
we
de
can't
tempo,
do
até
quality
porque as
overnight.
pessoas, e principalmente, né, a
So
nossa
we
comunidade
need
científica
time,
confie
even for
e possa
people
colocar
and our
os resultados das pesquisas
scientific
nessas diamantes.
community
É
to
isso,
be able
muito
to
obrigada.
allocate the
Eu espero que a
research,
gente possa
the
ainda conversar
results and
pouquinho,
investigation in their
refletir
journals. Thank you so
sobre
much, and I hope we can
os
discuss
nossos dados.
further
Obrigada.
and reflect on our
Muito
data.
obrigado,
Thank you.
Andrea. Sim, a ideia é que a
Thank
gente
you,
troque
Andrea.
experiências, a gente troque ideias
We have an
de
exchange
como
of experiences
atingir,
and
né,
ideas of
esse
how
desejo
to
de uma
reach
ciência aberta, de fato, uma ciência
this
inclusiva e
desire for
equitativa.
open
Bom, mas
science,
agora, inclusive, a
inclusive and
título de
equitable science. But
sugestão,
now,
modelo, eu passo a
as
palavra
a
para minha querida
suggestion or model, let me
Andrea
give the
Mora,
floor to my dear
para que ela
Andrea
possa nos
Mora,
contar
so
como
that
as
she can
coisas
tell us
ocorrem na Costa Rica, que eu acho que é modelo bem
how
interessante.
everything happens
Querida
in Costa
Andrea,
Rica. I think
a
it's
palavra
very
toda sua.
interesting. Dear Andrea, you have the floor.
Gracias, querida Bianca, y gracias a
Thank you,
todos y
dear
todas por
Bianca, and
acompañarnos y
thank
por
you
los
everyone for
colegas que
joining
están
us
acá, que
and our
hemos
colleague
hecho
panelists
muchas
that are
arduas por
here. We've worked
proteger
very
las
hard on
revistas de
this
acceso abierto no
to have
comercial.
open access,
Voy a
non-commercial open
compartir
access
y
in
también voy a
journals.
poner
I'm going to
mi
share my screen
tiempo para no robarle el
and
tiempo a
will
Cristian.
share my contact information in the chat.
Creo que y usted me dice si se...
Agora
Sí,
sim,
sí se ve. Sí.
sim, sim.
Ok. Bueno, y esa es la pregunta que muchos de los
Okay,
que
so this
trabajamos
is
con
the
revistas siempre
question
nos
that
hacemos.
many of
¿Cómo
us
lo
that work
hacemos?
with
¿Cómo
journals
logramos para
come up with?
proteger las
How do
revistas
we
y que
do
sean sostenidas por
to
nuestros
make
propios recursos?
sure our
Este es un
journals are
ejemplo,
sustained by
un
our own
ejemplo de Costa
resources?
Rica, de mi
This is an
universidad,
example of
que no
Costa
fue
Rica
sencillo,
from my
lleva muchísimos
university.
años
It
también
was
para
not easy.
lograrlo,
It
pero
took
lo
us many
logramos.
years to
Y
happen,
creo
but
que en
we're
este
able
momento
to achieve it. And I think
este modelo
this
está
model right
sirviendo para
now
que otras
is
universidades
being
de
used for other
Centroamérica
universities
lo
in Central
reproduzcan,
America and
ojalá
the
que lo
Caribbean
mejoren
to
y nosotros
reproduce it,
después
hopefully
podamos
improve it,
aprender las
so
lecciones
that
de
we can
ellos, de
also
ellos
learn
y
their
también de
lessons
gente
as
de
well,
África
and also
que hemos
from people
estado
from
colaborando
Africa that
con
we've
nuestro
been
modelo.
collaborating
Bueno,
with. Let me just remind you, Arianna, Blanca have already said this, that the importance of scientific journals in our universities that are for our own science to circulate. It's space for our knowledge to circulate without paying. We don't have so much money to pay $50 or $100 for an article, and even less to pay $6,000 or $12,000 for an APC. And our investigation projects have this budget as a whole. And I want to go back to Secho, Alonso Packer, and Aguao have said that it's true in Latin America. Most journals are sustained by resources from state-owned universities and research institutes. Why is it important to have a model? It's to protect the journals of every university, which is a reality in Latin America. And the idea is to organize our home and say, how will we sustain it, channel the resources, and see. Bianca used a phrase that I love, and it's that journals are like children, and we need to support them. And this is an example of how we do it in our university. Another important aspect is that when we organize a journal in our university, we need to see with what resources the journal will be supported. I'm sharing a link of the publishers of our journals, and we systematized how we did to achieve this model. And let me greet my colleagues here and the publishers on the journals that helped us build this. How did we build this model? The key was to work with all of the publishers. In many parts in Latin America, open access specifically was born with the publishers of journals. And that's why we have a different awareness. And with a very consolidated group that we have in my university, in every one of the state-owned universities, not only in Costa Rica, but in Latin America, we worked with them and then with specialists to build this model. We did and still do a lot of training that we share with anyone in the world. One of them is this one. We study other models and experiences to be able to build the model, and then work as a group with all of the stakeholders that had to do with the sustainability of the scientific journals. This is the model or diagram of how they support themselves in my university. And journals are the children of the schools from the various universities, and therefore they're the ones that have to make sure they get the financial resources, and they're guided by the rectorship of research. And this is a very common reality in Latin America, together with technology. Then sometimes you say, how do they do the layout? It's the specific department of the university, and I think it happens in all journals. And other departments that collaborate are these. I'm dropping the links here if you want to see it.
las experiencias y los procesos.
Hopefully to illuminate your processes and procedures. These are the principles that guide our model. I would like to go back to two that I like. All of them have to be open access, non-commercial, it's mandatory. Nobody can charge APC. And something I love is the reciprocity. We start off from the fact that if, as universities, we sustain ourselves, then there are going to be other universities that will have the journals like this, and we will be able to publish in other universities without APCs. And this is a model that we have in Latin America. This is the structure of a journal. And it's just as an example, one of our journals, and the link is there if you want to go deep into it. It's different structures, but it's actual models of how we're working with our own resources. To that end, we built some regulation, and all journals have to be non-commercial open access. None can charge APC. All publishers need to have a specific profile. And something that happens very often in Latin America, it's most journals are sustained with people without any remuneration. In my university, it's mandatory that all publishers get paid for their services. And like I said, they're sustained by the schools themselves. And the positions have to come from there. With that, we take care of a problem that has always existed in Latin America, which is that publishers don't get a salary. This is further regulation if you want to explore. But let me tell you that in my university, there is a strategy on open access, and therefore the level is protected even further, and it's aligned with a national strategy of open science among state-owned universities that seeks to protect the model further with a regional strategy of access to open science among 28 state-owned universities in Central America and the Caribbean. All of them commit themselves to having journals in open, non-commercial open access. These strategies are also public so that you can see, and the advantage is that as a region, it allows us to consolidate the processes with the Diamond Journal protection. How did you do it? It's a question that I always get. I can't specify how much it costs, but it's very important, and we were able to draw the costs so that you can have access to see how we did it, and maybe you can reproduce and improve. This is the cost to our university to sustain Diamond Journals, and I put this together with some data provided by my dear colleague from Redalyc, Arianna. And if we use Redalyc technology, it accommodates better to sustain journals in non-commercial open access. And you can see this in the studies that I'm provided. And I'd like to thank for the existence to the regional initiatives like Redalyc that have allowed us to further this. To finish, where are we heading? Conclusions and recommendations. We're creating similar models in Central America and the Caribbean. From last year, we're collaborating with some universities from Africa, and it's been very interesting because they've also fed our model. Something very important is journals should be World Heritage. It's a public asset. We need to see it like that. We work in collaboration. We always help each other. This characterizes Latin America, that we're always exchanging stuff. And I thank the regional initiatives that have helped us continue doing and materializing this model. And of course, in the attitude and collaborative behavior of Latin America, hopefully we can continue collaborating by sharing training, not only thinking about publishers, but also decision makers have to be engaged very strongly here to have access to protecting these journals. And with that, thank you so much.
Muito obrigada, querida Andrea. É sempre uma alegria ver.
Thank you, dear Andrea. We're always happy to see this model that your university adopted, which is a way to protect diamond journals. Now we understand the honor of having a space of 10 minutes for comments from Peter and Arianna regarding these issues. Peter, you have the floor first.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to thank CONARE and the BOAI for inviting me. And even more, I want to thank the journals that are already diamond and for continuing to be diamond in the face of the temptation to make the money possible through APCs. I don't have a presentation. I just want to comment on the previous two, maybe the previous three presentations, and I hope I can keep my comments within 5 minutes. One of the background problems that I worry about with diamond is that most universities and libraries prefer diamond open access journals to APC-based open access journals, but unfortunately, there's a simple way for universities to support APC-based journals, namely just pay the APCs. And there's not a comparably simple way for them to support diamond journals. I think a challenge for all of us is to think of equally simple ways for universities to do that. If we could, then many more universities would be doing it. They would be providing financial support for diamond journals. So one thing I want to comment on is that both the previous speakers gave us some concrete ways that universities can support diamond journals. They're not quite as simple as paying APCs, but they work and they prove that they can be put into practice. For example, hosting a diamond journal portal is a good idea. Redalyc does it, Campos does it. It's a non-trivial expense. It's a complicated piece of technology. It can't be subsidized by just one institution, but many institutions can share the cost. When they do, then different institutions can pay their share, can contribute to the support of diamond open access journals. It's paying your share, paying, let's say, annual dues, maybe even in proportion to how much your authors publish, is just about as simple as paying APCs, and yet it doesn't support APC-based journals. It supports diamond open access journals. Another, I really like the way Costa Rica has built the job of journal publishing into faculty jobs within the institution. It pays faculty and staff to provide those publishing services, and it thereby directly supports diamond open access journal publishing. It's not as simple as paying APCs, but it works. Just as a comment, publishers like to say that publishing is a profession, and universities don't have any training in that profession. Librarians don't have any training in that profession, and of course they're right about that. But if their conclusion is that universities and libraries can't publish journals, they're wrong, and hundreds of institutions have proved them wrong. But we have to appreciate that they have a point, that they can't do this without some training and without some experience. And one of the points I appreciate from Andrea Vieira was that in addition to infrastructure, we need management training. This was a point she made in passing. So let me just say, I'd like to hear more about that. I'd like to hear more about how COPPAS provides that management training. But we do need training on top of infrastructure to give people who are not originally publishers the experience and training they need to become publishers and to carry out publishing. One more point, going back to Arianna. She suggested that journals, diamond journals, started adopting APCs in part because of the loss of resources during the pandemic. And that's a very good point. And I think we should all worry about what could happen in the future if the resources that we now depend on start to shrink. I'm saying this as an American. Resources for science in my country are in sharp decline, serious, radical decline. And it's not that I'm worried that this will happen in every country, but what could happen is that other countries will learn not just that Donald Trump is doing this and getting away with it, but they will learn Donald Trump's method for doing it. His method for controlling science and universities is to control the funding for science and universities, and he is radically cutting back on that funding. That's a method that's easy to export because in almost every country, most research is publicly funded and it's in the hands of the government. And it only takes a change of government before those resources are in jeopardy. If true, then the same shift from diamond toward APCs that we've seen in Latin America since the pandemic, we could start to see elsewhere, not just in Latin America and in the US, but in other countries as well. That is, you don't have to be a Donald Trump to take advantage of the Trump method for controlling science and universities. One more point on on journal portals. I would like to see more journal portals, and I'd like to see international journal portals. Speaking of Donald Trump has given us an incentive, a very strong reason to host open access scientific literature and data in more than one place, in more than one country. And we have to put it beyond the control of governments like ours to take down or to censor. And so we need not just a good diamond journal portal to host diamond journals in a given country, but we need an international network of portals to share research so that if it's published in one country, it can be hosted in more than one other country, to put it beyond political control and to preserve academic freedom. And I think we have a good opportunity to learn from the Campos and Redalyc portals and other portals in Africa, not only how to make portals, but maybe how to coordinate portals so that they interoperate and preserve this academic freedom worldwide. Thanks. I look forward to the wider conversation later in the session.
Obrigada, Peter. Agora eu passo a palavra para você, Arianna.
Muchas gracias, Bianca. Gracias, Peter, como siempre, por los
Thank you,
comentarios.
Bianca,
Yo
and
quisiera,
thank you,
tengo un
Peter, for
comentario
your
y
comments.
unas
I have a
preguntas, si me
comment
permiten,
and a
aprovechando que
question, if
tenemos
you
aquí
allow me,
directamente
taking
a,
advantage
a
that we
tomadores y tomadoras
have
de decisiones de
decision
Brasil.
makers
Por
in
un lado,
Brazil.
quiero
On one
tomar o
hand,
retomar el punto
let
que
me go
mencionaba
back
Andrea
to
de
the
la
point
reciprocidad.
Andrea mentioned on
Esto,
reciprocity.
Este valor del acceso
This
abierto
value
diamante es
of
más
diamond open
importante
access is more
de lo
important
que creemos. Es decir,
than what we
sin la
think. In
reciprocidad
other
no
words,
estaríamos
without
hablando de
reciprocity,
que el acceso
we
abierto
wouldn't
diamante
be
es la vía
saying that
para
diamond
lograr
open
los
access is the
comunes del
way
conocimiento.
to
Es decir,
achieve the
toda
commons of
inversión
knowledge.
económica, humana
Every
que se hace
economic
en el
and human
sostenimiento de
investment
revistas
made
científicas por
in
parte de una
scientific
entidad
journals by an
beneficia a
entity
todo el común.
benefit
Y la
everyone.
inversión que hacen
And the
otras
investment
contrapartes, otras
made by
universidades,
other
otros
universities,
gobiernos en otros
counterparties,
países
and governments in
benefician
other
nuevamente al
countries
común. Entonces,
benefit the
todos
common.
contribuimos de
So
manera
we all
colectiva al
contribute
sostenimiento de
collectively
algo que es
to
común.
sustaining
Sin
something that
embargo,
is
si,
common.
si esto
However,
solo se decide por
if this is only decided by some entities and not all, we reduce the capacity of the commons to provide a service to all. That's why I think reciprocity is critical, even in scenarios as Peter describes, where there are economic cuts to investigation and publishing in many countries. It's infinitely more profitable, as can be seen in various studies, and I mean the academic and scientific community. It's more profitable to sustain diamond journals and benefit from the spectrum of diamond journals than paying APCs or paying for publishing. It's infinitely more profitable and more sustainable in time. Of course, it needs that the willingness of all these institutions and governments to do so collectively, so that this critical mass of journals is big enough to benefit epistemic communities through the various communities and disciplines. So this is something I wanted to bring up, because the APC model is not an economic model. Well, it is, but it's a model that goes beyond. Diamond model allows us to build commons, the commons of knowledge. It's not only an economic model, it's an economic model that comes out from the consequence of our priorities as governments and institutions. If what we want is to sustain public assets that are part of this cloud of common goods that benefit all or not. And it seems to me we need to think about our priorities as institutions and governments, what we want to prevail. For instance, in Mexico, that lately we have at a constitutional level already legislated the right to science as a human right in Mexico. This right to science provides a policy that covers the country, the strategies of open access. Nobody can be excluded from the benefits of science. So, and thank you. I was paying attention to Capi's presentation in detail. Some questions that I have in trying to compare and contrast what's being done in Mexico. Granting supports to scientific journals or infrastructures, my question is if it's accompanied by a policy, because oftentimes what we see in institutions is funding is provided to infrastructure and journals, but it's not accompanied by a policy. So it's a question for Capis, for Dr. Vieira, to know if this is accompanied by a non-APC policy or funding is provided, and at any rate, journals can decide whether they charge APC or not. And then the other important leverage that I'd like to better understand in the case of Brazil, and this is an open question to all colleagues in Brazil, is to know if in the scientific assessment systems, the way in which we value the activity of the research community, the publication is considered in diamond journals. We need to encourage from the assessment systems to publish there so that journals can have this additional incentive and prestige that is very much associated to the model of pay for publishing. But we need to consider the publication in diamond journals as part of the assessment systems as a high quality publication mechanism. And we need to encourage publication assessment systems to return to the prestige our academic journals had, but that has been being lost because of the huge commercial strategies of private publishers that say that those that don't charge have poor quality. And we know this is not true. So these are my comments and questions. Thank you, Bianca.
Muito obrigada, Arianna. Bom,
Thank you, Arianna.
Nós teremos a oportunidade de
Now we will have the opportunity
voltar a discutir, mas agora eu
to
gostaria,
discuss
gostaria de antes
again,
convidar a todos os nossos
but I would like
assistentes
first to
para
invite
estar aqui presente.
all of the
Se alguém
participants.
tiver alguma pergunta,
If
comentário
anyone
para fazer, por
has any
favor,
comment
o
or
faça ou
question,
no chat
please
ou
do so
no
in the
botãozinho
chat
de QIA para os nossos
or in the
participantes aqui do
Q&A
webinar, tá? E agora eu
tab
tenho o prazer de
for
chamar
questions.
ao palco
Now I have the
Fhillipe
pleasure to
Campos,
call to the
que nos dará
podium
uma visão
Fhillipe
daquilo que o
Campos,
Instituto Brasileiro de
that
Informação
will
e
provide
Ciência
a
e
vision
Tecnologia
of
anda
what the
fazendo,
Institute
anda
of Information,
pensando
Science and
em
Technology in
relação
Brazil is
às
doing,
revistas Diamante.
thinking
Fhillipe, você
about
tem a palavra.
in regards to
Boa tarde a
diamond
todos. Boa
journals.
tarde, Bianca. Primeiramente, agradeço o
Good morning and
convite do CONARE,
afternoon,
agradeço o Ministério
everyone.
Brasileiro de Ciência, Tecnologia e Inovação
Um,
pelo convite, a
I
BOAI também, em
want to
nome da
thank
AmeliCA,
everyone for
e
having
vou falar para vocês
invited
um
me.
pouco, rapidamente,
I
sobre
will
as
talk to
ações que a
you
gente
a
vem
little
desenvolvendo.
about
Diferente dos
the
meus colegas, eu não
actions
trouxe aqui
we've
uma apresentação, porque eu
developed.
vou fazer mais alguns
I
comentários
don't have a
pontuais sobre essas
presentation to
ações que a gente
share,
tem
but I
desenvolvido
will
ao
make
longo
some
de
specific
quase
comments regarding
pouco mais de
what
20
we've
anos, né?
developed
Então, o IBICT vem
for
atuando
over 20
na frente do
years.
acesso aberto e da ciência aberta a partir do final dos
We're
anos 90.
acting in
Então, a
open
partir disso, nós
science
começamos a construir
since the
algumas
90s,
infraestruturas,
and
tanto
since then
tecnológicas
we began
quanto
to
disseminar
build
as
technological
capacitações que, de
infrastructure
maneira ampla,
to
conseguem
disseminate
auxiliar
training
os editores científicos
extensively
na editoração de suas
to
revistas.
help
Bom,
scientific
então, talvez
studies.
uma das grandes
And I
realizações do IBICT
think
no sentido de capacitações
one of
em
the
termos do apoio
big
técnico foi
actions
dado
in
historicamente
training,
a utilização
we
do
have
software
the
OJS
technical
para editoração de
lab
revistas científicas. Então, esse software
uh,
foi
that
inicialmente
historically
traduzido e customizado para o
um,
cenário brasileiro
that
e foi
was
amplamente
initially
difundido. E depois,
translated
quando o
and
OJS
customized
passa a
and
já ter a versão em
extensively
português, nós continuamos
disseminated.
também
It's
dando
already in
capacitações, e isso com certeza
Portuguese, and we
auxiliou bastante na
continue
criação e na
training,
manutenção das
and
revistas
this
científicas
helped a
brasileiras.
lot to create and
Outra ação que
maintain
nós temos é o
resilient
portal
scientific
ABER,
journals.
que é o Portal
Other
Brasileiro de
actions that
Publicações e
we
Dados
have
Científicos em Acesso
is
Aberto,
the ABER
que hoje
portal,
reúne uma
the
série de
publication of
fontes de
open
informação
access
científica,
scientific
dentre
data
elas as
that
revistas
has
científicas,
scientific
e salvo engano,
information,
nós hoje temos um pouco
scientific
mais de 1.500
journals.
revistas que são
And today we
coletadas pelo
have
braço
over
ABER. E isso aumenta
1,500
consideravelmente
journals
a visibilidade dessas revistas,
that
que em sua maioria
are
funcionam no
providing
modelo de
visibility
acesso
to these
aberto. Então,
journals that mostly
todas elas nós
work with
sabemos
the
que têm
model
acesso
of
aberto, mas uma
diamond
parte nós sabemos que
access.
tem
We
outro
know
tipo de
all of
acesso
them are
C, mas
open
boa parte
access, but
operam
we
em acesso aberto
know
diamante. E o nosso
some
intuito
of
aqui
them
nesse
have
IBICT é cada
APC
vez mais
models,
fazer com que essas
but
revistas
many
possam
of them
ser
are in diamond
indexadas
open
pelo
access, and
portal
we're struggling
ABER, e
to
quando
have
isso
more
estiver
indexed.
a outras
And
iniciativas
with that,
internacionais que o ASBR
we
tem
can get to other
parceria.
international initiatives that ABR
Além disso,
has a
nós
connection with.
também temos
Apart from
promoções de
this,
workshops que são veiculados em diferentes
we
cenários
have the
diferentes contextos do
promotion
Brasil.
of
Então, o Brasil é
workshops in
país
different contexts in Brazil.
continentais, então
Brazil
nossas ações
is
elas
a
acabam
continental
sendo
country, so our
amplas para que a gente
actions
consiga atender os
are
editores científicos das
big
mais
to
diversas
be able to
instituições e
reach
locais do Brasil. Além disso,
scientists
temos
from all
também várias parcerias
institutions in
estratégicas que
Brazil. Apart
foram
from
sendo
this,
construídas ao
we
longo
have
desses
different
anos.
strategic
Então,
partnerships
como
that
foi
were
comentado aqui no
built
começo, o
throughout the
Brasil
last
atua
years. And as
desde
was
os anos
discussed at the
2000,
beginning, Brazil
1998, como Centro Brasileiro
acts
do Latindex,
since
e isso faz com que tenhamos
1998
uma
in
ampla
Latin
conexão com os editores
America,
científicos. Então, esse papel
making a
educativo, esse
connection with
papel pedagógico que o
scientific
Latindex tem, a
publishers
gente
with a
tem
pedagogical
consolidado
role in
bastante
Latin
no âmbito do IBICT.
America,
Além disso, diversas parcerias
given
com a rede La Referência de muitos anos,
the
e também algumas parcerias
opportunity
com
and the
a
size and the
Brasil. Inclusive,
reference,
agradeço a Edna, que vai falar um pouco depois de mim,
and also
que também
with
tem nos
ABEC
auxiliado
Brazil.
bastante
I would like
nesse
to thank
contato
Edna
direto com
that
os
will
editores,
speak
especialmente aqueles
that will
de
speak
acesso aberto
after me,
diamante, que nem
that
sempre
help us
possuem
contact all
as
of the
estruturas e
open
equipamentos
access
necessários para a
publishers
manutenção de suas
that
revistas.
not always
Dentro
have
de todo
the
esse
infrastructure
ecossistema, não poderia
necessary
deixar de
resources to
mencionar
maintain their journals.
uma
I
iniciativa um
cannot
pouco mais
leave
recente do
out
IBICT, que é o Diretório das
a
Revistas
more
Científicas
recent
Eletrônicas
initiative,
Brasileiras, apelidado,
which
conhecido como
is
MIGLIN. Ele foi lançado em
Niclin.
2023 e hoje ele ocupa
It
lugar
was
de
launched
décimo
in
canto dentro do
23,
cenário
and today
empresarial
it
brasileiro.
has an
Ele foi criado
important place
justamente
in the
com o
Brazilian
objetivo da gente
scenario,
conseguir reunir
and it
e
was
conhecer a
created to be
realidade
able to
editorial
bring
das revistas
together
científicas
and
brasileiras.
learn about the
Então, além de
editorial
dados
reality
bibliográficos
of
sobre
scientific
publicações,
journals
nós
in
temos uma
Brazil.
série de
Apart from
informações
bibliographical data,
editoriais
we have
e o IBICT,
information
ele
from
tem também essa função de
publishers,
tentar padronizar
and it
essas
has the
informações
role
sobre as revistas
of
que
trying to
estavam dispersas
standardize
em diferentes iniciativas.
information
E esse
that was
trabalho,
dispersed
obviamente,
in
ele é
various
feito com amplo
initiatives.
apoio dos editores científicos
This
brasileiros que
work
nos
is
auxiliam
done with the
diariamente
support
na
of
manutenção, na atualização
Brazilian
desses dados.
scientists that help us to
Dentro
maintain
uma das
access to
funcionalidades que a
data.
gente tem no diretório Miguelis
One of
é
the
o selo de revista
functionalities
diamante,
that we
que é o
have in
selo
the
que identifica e
directory
destaca todas as revistas científicas
is
que publicam
the
no
diamond
modelo.
peer
Então,
review that
atualmente, no Miguelis, nós temos
identify the
cerca de
status of the
4.900
journals
revistas
that comply with
vigentes, ou
this
seja,
model.
4.900 revistas
At present, we have
que estão ativas.
4,800
Dessas
journals
4.900,
that
nós
are
temos por selo de
active, and of
revista
these,
diamante,
we
cerca de
have
1.200 revistas.
with
Então,
diamond
nós sabemos que nós
seal
temos muito mais do
almost
que isso, que precisa ser
1,200.
trabalhado
So
diariamente
we know we have more
para
than that.
aumentar esse
We,
número e,
we've
consequentemente,
worked on a
com o
daily
passar do
basis to
tempo, conseguir
increase
firmar
this
algumas
number,
parcerias para
and
que essas
therefore,
revistas
through
diamante
time,
possam estar
to
em outros
sign
modelos.
some
Um exemplo
partnerships
recente aqui, que
for
um
diamond
potencial parceiro nosso.
journals
Então, também agradeço a fala
to be
da
like
Arianna,
Redalyc, which
um pouco antes.
is a
Além
partner
disso,
of ours
e
that I
já
would
para
like
algumas
to thank
perspectivas futuras
Ariana's
e
words
também
as
já
well.
para
Also, with
encerrar um pouco
future
a minha fala,
perspectives,
nós temos
and
também
to
pensado na
finish,
criação do Diretório Brasileiro de
we've
Avaliadores
thought
Científicos e
about
Técnicos,
creating a
que
Brazilian
terá como objetivo
directory
auxiliar as
of
revistas na busca
scientific
por revisores
technical
qualificados
advisors with the
para seus artigos.
objective
Então, a gente
to
sabe
look for
que
qualified reviews for these
dentre as
articles, so that
os
we
diversos
know
entraves do processo editorial,
that
deles, talvez um dos
in the
principais, além do
various
financiamento de outros
editorial
recursos,
publications,
é a
some of
questão da
them
revisão
apart
por
from
pares. Então, muitas
funding,
revistas acabam tendo muita
we have the issue
dificuldade
of the peer
em encontrar
review.
revisores que
We've
possam
had
realizar
lots of
artigos e possam ser
difficulty
publicados
to find
com
reviewers
o
that can
menor
make
tempo
these
possível, né?
assessments
Então, a criação
in
desse
the
diretório
least
de
amount of
avaliadores
time
vem como
possible.
forma
And the
de cumprir essa
creation of
lacuna.
this
É um projeto que
directory of
infelizmente ainda não começou a ser
evaluators
executado, mas muito
is
em breve
critical to
isso
bridge
irá
this
acontecer.
gap. It's
Então, eu
still
acredito
not
que é
in
isso. O IBICT
place.
vem ao longo
We
desses anos
hope to have it
fortalecendo
soon.
suas infraestruturas, tentando novas
We're
parcerias,
strengthening its
fortalecendo,
infrastructure,
dando mais
trying
capacitação,
to
participando de
create new
vários eventos.
partnerships,
E esse evento
providing a
mais um
lot of
desses que
training
nós
and
temos muito
participating in
prazer em
events.
estar
And
contribuindo.
this
Eu
event
agradeço a
is
Bianca,
one more that we have
novamente a
the
Arianna e a
pleasure
todos aqui presentes e
to
fico à
be. And
disposição
I'd like to
para
thank
comentários.
Bianca,
Muito
Ariana,
obrigado.
and everyone present. And I'm
Muito
open
obrigada,
for
querido
any
Fhillipe.
question.
Bom,
Thank you,
agora eu
dear
passo a palavra
Fhillipe.
para outra pessoa
Now,
muito
let
querida,
me give the
Edna
floor
Montero,
to another
presidente da
very dear person, Edna Montero,
Bom,
president
boa
of
tarde a
ABIC.
todos. Começo agradecendo,
Good
Bianca,
afternoon,
o convite por
everyone.
estar aqui
Let
com
me begin by
vocês, trazendo
thanking
pouquinho
Bianca
do que a Associação
for
Brasileira
the invite.
está fazendo
I
em
worked
relação
on
à
the
ciência
what
aberta
the
como um
Brazilian
todo, né?
associations are doing regarding open
A
science as a whole.
ABEC, para quem não tem esse conhecimento, nós temos quase
So
500
that
revistas
we
associadas, individuais, temos
have
também
a number of
associações,
individual
das
journals that are
instituições
associated. We also
universitárias,
have
e a
partnerships
ABEC, ela
with
vem
university
sempre trabalhando,
institutions,
desde que
and
nasceu, a ideia
ABEC
era
has
justamente
always
ver como
worked since it was
profissionalizar toda a
created
parte de
with the
o campo da
idea
editoria
of how
científica
to
sempre foi bastante lindo,
professionalize
passa para o outro, o aprendizado era muito de
scientific
passagem de um para o
publication.
outro. E a ABEC,
It
nesse
was
sentido,
always
vem
going from
trabalhando
one
sempre
place
junto,
to another.
no sentido não
And in
só
this
do
regard, ABEC
profissionalismo
is
dos
working
editores,
not
mas de
only
todo o
to
corpo que trabalha
professionalize
com a editoria
publishers,
científica.
but also
Dessa forma,
everyone
nos últimos
that
4
works
anos,
with
temos
scientific
criado
activities. And in the
sistema
last
que é o
4
ABEC
years,
Educação, que
we've
trazem
created a
cursos para
system
formação
that
em
is
várias
ABEC
vertentes, tanto
education,
gestão editorial
courses to
como de
train
revisão por pares. São
different
3 áreas, uma
areas,
de gestão,
publishing,
uma de
peer
avaliação e
review.
uma de
It's 3
ferramentas.
paths:
E
management,
dentro dessas
assessment, and
várias
tools.
disciplinas, em
And
que
within
a ideia
them,
é dar uma
there are
certificação
different
generalizada, mas
disciplines
ela
with
pode
the
ser
idea of
compartimentalizada
providing a
também.
generalized
E por que que a gente
certification
entende
that can
isso, né? A
also be
ciência aberta, desde a
individualized.
sua
And why do we understand this?
digamos,
Open
criação aí,
science
né, da sua
from
conceituação, é
its
uma
inception
educação, porque ela exige mudança de cultura.
is a transition because it requires a cultural change. And it's the difficulty we have here in the various narratives. We need to change our own culture of how we publish, how we're going to do it, because if from every institution we create the journals, and not only one journal, but a series, and then we think, why are we creating journals if there is no change of how to disseminate what we do that will help knowledge, that will add to modern knowledge, whether local? This is important that has been presented, and therefore it requires investment actions and collective actions as a whole. We talked about policies. All of us need to be together working so that everything that is produced is well disseminated. This scientific dissemination has to reach to the global north and to the global south. And also regionally, many productions are very important and much more relevant at a local level than global. But we need to have this mindset. So the big difficulty is this one, that it's complex. We need collaboration. A while ago, I was in Colombia, and we need to come up together and think about opportunities to grow, to make the dissemination of what gets produced, like how our journals are sustained. We've already talked about the sustainability in the model that Andrea presented, Andrea from Costa Rica. In Brazil, we have 96 public institutions, and every one of them has different journals. Almost 5,000 journals in Brazil, and most of them are connected to public or state-owned institutions or private institutions or scientific associations. So that, what do we need to do? Andrea mentioned ABICT has participated in this group of open science together with Campos and in association with IDB, always seeking to find what we can do. The idea is qualification. We need to qualify all of the publishers involved to raise awareness on the charges of this rate that seems so necessary to open data and to close when not possible. Is it that we're talking about charging a rate, an amount? How much can the government fund, or how much can an institution fund? And there's always something where we need to think, because increasingly publishers are more technological. It's less of a personal work, but it's basically tools, apart from paying somebody's salary, to work on the editorial part, because it's the professor that they have their position, and they will work at some point within their work hours for scientific publications and for peer review. This is a reality. So that how can we think about a model that is really feasible? We are in Latin America. I know we need this and we need to be careful, but what's that care that we need to have? It's not only producing and showing for ourselves. We need to disseminate this global knowledge. and how to do all of this. I want to congratulate the discussion here because it's very important to have these discussions for us to understand that there are no contrary conditions. We just have different ways of trying to see and look for solutions. Cielo was the first global movement of free open access. It was born within MEC in a BEC meeting where the discussion came up on the creation of Cielo. And Diamond Access was Diamond Access 4 or 5 years later. And then accepting charging for APC because journals couldn't sustain themselves. So it's the issue of sustainability. I wanted to say a lot more and many other points for us to think together, but the role of a BEC has been to qualify this problem in all of our meetings, whether local or international, and we've taken the discussion of open science and sustainability. All of these topics have been discussed precisely to raise awareness and how to look for solutions to these problems. So this is what I wanted to say. Let me thank for the opportunity for being here. Thank you, Edna, because we're approaching the end of our session. We're going to have a direct question to panelists, beginning by Arianna. And it's a question to Andrea. We only ask that you be brief. I'm also going to read some questions that are being asked in the chat because our time is almost up. So Arianna and Andrea.
Gracias, Bianca. Sí, mi pregunta concreta era si, además del apoyo
So my
que se tiene para la
specific
revista
question,
Diamante, existe una
apart from the
política
support that
para
exists,
que
is
las
there a
revistas no
policy for
adopten el
journals
APC? Y por
not
otro
to
lado,
adopt
si se
APC?
reconoce
And on the
la
other
creación de
hand,
revistas de acceso abierto
if
Diamante,
publication in Diamond
como dentro de los
publication
sistemas de evaluación
is
de la
recognized
comunidad
in the
investigadora.
assessment system of the research community. This is a very good question. Let me thank, because Peter also made some comments in this regard. This transfer that we make to Cielo is not connected to a policy that requires journals not to charge per se. What do we need to understand? Cielo today has an infrastructure that accommodates articles and does all of the digital part, and that's the infrastructure we're supporting. There is funding that comes from the university itself. I'm speaking on behalf of CUPS to fund the entire process of the publishing. We only fund a part of the infrastructure of Cielo. Something else is funded by the institution. But if you ask me, do we create this committee of open science with the idea of talking about these aspects and developing this policy? But I, Andrea, this is not an official opinion. I understand that if we're funding public resources, there is no space for APCs, but this can only happen when I'm able to fund the editorial process. If there's something that I don't do, I can't tell journals not to do it, because there has to be a very clear publishing theory or a framework to be able to, but we need resources to request this. So maybe in the future we can have Diamond back, and it's a matter of time, and we've worked very hard to think about a budget for this, thinking about a budget to build infrastructure in Brazil and infrastructure that will end up being a regional infrastructure. Something else that I'd like to mention is the mindset. We've worked with the scientific community, and you said it very well. The work done with the publishers of saying that open access is not good, that diamond doesn't have any quality. We're working and showing the success cases that exist and speaking with researchers. If you don't publish your excellent study in diamond journals, it will never appear. You need to believe in the journal for them to have visibility, access, and acceptance, similar to a commercial journal. So the work is not easy, but it's something we do shoulder to shoulder with the various areas of knowledge.
Bom, eu gostaria de fazer algumas perguntas aqui que estão.
I have a few questions that I can see here. Okay, the first one was for Arianna. The person asks.
Bom, enfim, basicamente.
Basically, the question was regarding the most widely used language in publications. These journals, before charging APC, they published in English, and that went to publish in English. Once they introduced in APC, they already published in English, but they started receiving more articles in English than the local language, but they already published in English originally.
Eu tenho uma pergunta de novo para você, Andrea. A perspectiva de ampliação
I have a question of the perspective of extending, is there a perspective of changing criteria adopted? Is there an open access Brazilian journal? This was mentioned. Can it have some change? Okay, thank you for all of this.
Ele é do CNPq e a gente participa com o CNPq. O CNPq não nos acionou para
CNPq
a gente está aqui no aguardo. Com relação ao programa de
didn't give us for further publication. That's why we're waiting in this program to strengthen journals. We've created a committee of open science that will soon be appointed, and this committee will define the criteria for this program. But I need to say that the program will be managed, and this will be managed through Cielo. That's the main idea. So most likely there will be an expansion of Cielo. We still don't know the details because the committee itself has to help us design to be as complete as possible. I have a question for Fhillipe. It's confirmed that IBICT is using this in dissertations. Is there a provision, a persistent identifier for those that don't know, that will be free of charge? And therefore, it's very important to the region to develop this identifier that is being done in association with IBICT and La Referencia to be adopted by countries in Latin America as a whole. And the question is there a date
em artigos científicos?
of
Eu
when
diria que
it
não,
is
mas
possible to
responde
use it
você.
in scientific
Bom,
journals.
obrigado pela
Um,
pergunta. O IBICT tem total interesse
Fhillipe,
na ampliação da rede DARC, né, como a Bianca comentou.
okay,
É um
I've
investimento consistente que vai
noticed
ser atribuído de forma gratuita. Nós ainda não temos um cronograma
persistent
definido
indicators
sobre
will
quando
be attributed for
começará
free,
a
but there
implementação
is
do
no
DARC para artigos
chronogram
científicos e diversas
as
tipologias
to
documentais,
when
mas como eu falei, é de nosso interesse ampliar
it
essa
will
rede
be
o mais breve
disseminated.
possível.
But
Mas
like I
também é bom lembrar
said,
que o DARC não foi criado para, de alguma maneira, competir com o DOI.
it
Né? Então, o DOI que vem sendo
was
utilizado. A gente sabe
created
que ele tem
to
custos, mas a
compete,
gente não cria, não, o DARC não foi criado
knowing
como
that
forma de
their
competir com o DOI ou
resources
de subutilizar
and
o DOI.
Tecna
Então,
was not created
enquanto
to
ele não for
compete with
aplicado nos
doc
artigos
or
científicos e outras tipologias
to
documentais, o DOI,
underuse it.
obviamente, pode e
This will
deve
be with
continuar sendo
scientific
utilizado.
articles and documents.
Obrigada, Fhillipe. Bom, tem uma pergunta imensa aqui, mas eu tenho a impressão que o nosso tempo já esgotou, não é isso, Melissa?
I have a big question here, but our time is up.
Nosso tempo acabou.
Our time is up,
É isso?
right?
Yes, unfortunately. We increased the time from the last webinar, which was an hour, to 90 minutes, but unfortunately we have run out of time. I think this is such a rich area, and we will continue our series of webinars focused on it. But right now, I'd like to thank everyone, especially Bianca and all of our speakers and our interpreters and all of the participants. As we mentioned, recordings will be available in all 3 languages, and we look forward to following up with you and continuing this important conversation. So thank you all very much.
Muito obrigada a todos, muito obrigada e até uma próxima oportunidade.
Thank you all and see you soon.
Obrigado, pessoal.